If it is true, it reflects that there is no trust, and it reflects also that the institutions in the United States are used to spying on their friends and their enemies in the same way. Ali Al-Daba, spokesman for the Iraqi government.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. We are discussing whether Iraq is going to be the biggest CIA hub in the world with David Pollack, Phyllis Bennis and Sabah al-Muktar. David, what guarantees are there that the U.S. will not conduct operations from Iraq beyond the borders of Iraq?
The guarantees are in the SOFA, in the Status of Forces Agreement, which the Iraqi government democratically elected. And I'm sorry to hear our colleague in London calling elections a joke. I'm sorry that that's his view of democracy. But the freely elected Iraqi government and the American government signed an agreement in which the two countries agreed that Iraq would not be used as a position for aggression or subversion against any other country. But can you see why the Iranians
and the Syrians are a little bit leery that the very essence of that SOFA does not give them the guarantee Iraq will not be a springboard against them?
No, actually, I don't see why they need to be concerned about the SOFA agreement. And it is true, of course, that Iran tried very hard to block the SOFA agreement. And then when the democratic Iraqi government agreed to it, after all, in a free vote in its parliament, Iran suddenly changed its tune and now says that it actually accepts the SOFA agreement.
Phyllis, right now there is a loggerhead between Washington and Tehran. There is some sort of tension going on because of Iran's nuclear quest. Will the U.S. presence, this massive presence in Iraq, will help the U.S. in order to win this next phase between Tehran and Washington?
I think the creation of U.S. military bases throughout Iraq has further destabilized the relationship between the U.S. and Iran, particularly one of the large mega bases that was built just a few kilometers from the Iranian border. Has to be seen by Iran as a hostile act, SOFA or no SOFA. Additionally, the SOFA only speaks about prohibiting military attacks. That's assuming one wants to believe that the United States believes itself to be bound by that SOFA. That's a big question, not least because it was never even allowed to be brought to the Senate for ratification, as our Constitution requires. The claim was made by President Bush and his representatives that this was, quote, only a SOFA agreement, which does not require ratification. But as Sabah indicated, ordinary SOFA agreements do not allow, under any circumstances, the U.S. soldiers on those military bases in other countries to carry out military activities with or without consultation, something that is, of course, allowed in this SOFA. It's a very, very different kind of treaty. It's a treaty that needs ratification, has not been ratified. The whole world knows that. So the question of whether it is indeed even binding on the U.S. government and will be perceived as being binding is a major question. I think it doesn't deal at all with the issue of spying. I think that spying by the U.S. and by every other government in the region is widespread, and certainly this will make U.S. spying far easier.
Let me get a quick response from David before I go back to Sabah. Go ahead, David.
Well, I'm really not sure what there is to respond to. I don't understand the arguments that Phyllis just presented. And I would simply say that just as we have agreements freely entered into with many countries around the world, including Qatar, where your station broadcasts from, and the UK, where our other guest is from, so we too have an agreement on various embassy, diplomatic, and security matters with the democratically elected Iraqi government. If either of your guests think that it was better for Iraq or for the region under Saddam Hussein, then I might better understand some of their arguments today.
The classic answer, David, I'm sorry, that doesn't really fly anymore.
Sabah, you mentioned Sabah, you mentioned that
why doesn't that fly?
Go ahead, Phyllis, if you want to answer it. Go ahead.
Just very briefly, and I think you know that the answer to that rhetorical question is that the fact that Iraqis lived under a dictatorship which was supported by our government for many years, as you no doubt are aware from having been a lifetime civil servant in the State Department, does not mean that they wanted years of occupation after the overthrow of that dictatorship. So let's be very clear about that. I don't think that's a new question. The accusation that anyone who disagrees with the U.S. occupation is somehow a sympathizer or a supporter of Saddam Hussein is a really old argument, and it really doesn't fly very much.
Before David jumps in, let me go back to Sabah.
You mentioned Sabah. A good one. I would just ask you, Phyllis, which do you think is better, Iraq today or Iraq under Saddam Hussein?
I can tell you, David. David, you
yes,
and
please,
I and the rest of us are yes, okay. We are all talking hot air because we are sitting outside. The average Iraqi today who lives in Iraq, who lived under Saddam Hussein, will take you to task that everything in his life today is worse than what it was under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. And secondly, let me finish.
True.
And if you think,
can we hear from
no, that is. Can I just finish? And the second thing, if you actually take the yardstick of Saddam Hussein to measure your success, then damn it, you are really sinking to a very low level in performance, because you don't judge your performance to the performance of a dictatorship. To go back to the SOFA, immediately after the SOFA, the US attacked al-Muktar in Syria. They said they were arresting people, then they said it's nothing to do with them. Then one more thing I want to tell you, that the Iranians, when they changed their mind, as you said, about the SOFA agreement, because they are happy now for the American soldiers to stay there, because when the US said they have identified 3,000 targets in Iran, Iran's response is yes, and we have identified 150,000 US targets in Iraq. So this is a useful tool for the Iranians,
stop you for
but
just a second.
David,
can you see why Iraqis in general are a little bit abhorrent about the fact that during those 6 years, the United States managed to pretty much tie all the ropes and all the lines into many, many Iraqi politicians and many, many Iraqi movements? Some of them, they work closely with the CIA, some of them work closely with the US Army. And there is almost a general consensus in Iraq right now that the current Iraqi leadership somehow is beholden to a foreign interest as opposed to an Iraqi interest.
No, I think that's a lie. And I don't think you have a shred of evidence to back up those ridiculous statements that you just made. In fact, every single public opinion poll done not by the United States, but by the BBC and others in Iraq, shows that most Iraqis believe that they are better off today than they were before the United States liberated Iraq from Saddam Hussein's nasty dictatorship. And it also shows that most Iraqis believe that their democratically elected government is an Iraqi government. So all of your silly statements about nonsensical, untrue ties between Iraqi politicians.
I can see you're hurling accusations left and right, David, using words like silly and nonsense and without even backing it up. But I'll leave the last word for Phyllis Bennis.
I'd like to hear what you have to back up your accusations.
Go ahead, Phyllis. Wrap up the program.
I think that the key is the U.S. continuing occupation of Iraq something that is good for Iraqis and good for the Americans? And I think the answer is no. I think that the reason that President Obama moved to the front of the line of candidates was precisely because he said he would end the war. I think that there is a great movement in this country that has fought to end the war over these last 6 years and is continuing now to hold President Obama to that commitment. The question is going to be, how can that withdrawal of troops and bringing the troops home, closing the bases, how does that happen in the least disruptive way possible? I think that needs to be the goal, not to justify the years of occupation. This is a new era, and I think that it's going to be up to public opinion, public mobilization in this country, as well as globally, to reflect that reality that it's time for this war to be over and bring those troops home, not send them on to Afghanistan to make the same mistakes that the U.S. government has made in Iraq.
Phyllis Bennis, David Pollack, Sabah al-Muktar, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, have a good day.